On December 21st, 1939, in a snow-buried forest at -37 degrees Celsius, a 23-year-old Finnish farm mechanic lay face down in the frozen earth, waiting to kill or be killed. The air tasted like copper and pine. Simo Häyhä pressed his cheek against wood that burned with cold. His breath, he couldn't let it fog. One white cloud rising from the snowbank would give him away. The Soviet soldiers were hunting, 73 of them, spread through the trees like wolves, searching for the ghost who'd taken 11 of their brothers in 2 days. He heard them before he saw them. Boots crunching, ice breaking, Russian voices cutting through the silence, angry and afraid. They were close, too close, 50 meters, 40. The space between heartbeats felt like hours. His rifle had no scope, just iron sights and instinct. The doctrine said a sniper needed magnification. Rangefinders, the best German optics. Without them, you were blind past 300 meters. Every manual said so. Every expert agreed. Simo didn't care what they said. He'd learned to shoot by hunting rabbits on his family's farm in Rautjärvi. Small, fast, impossible targets that vanished into brush if you blinked. You didn't use scopes on rabbits. You used patience. Silence. The ability to become part of the landscape until the moment you pulled the trigger. Now he was hunting men. The first Soviet appeared through the birch trees, a dark shape against white snow. Young face, scared eyes. Rifle at low, ready. Simo's finger moved to the trigger. Not yet. Wait. The doctrine said, take the first shot immediately. Establish dominance. Simo knew better. One shot would reveal his position. One shot would bring 72 rifles bearing down on him. He needed 3. The second soldier emerged. Then the third. They moved in a tight cluster, exactly as their commanders had trained them. Predictable. Fatal. Simo inhaled halfway. Held it. Between heartbeats, in the space where time stops and the world goes quiet, he fired. The first man dropped. The others froze. That half-second of confusion that separates the living from the dead. Simo worked the bolt. Smooth. Mechanical. His hands moved like they were separate from his mind, trained by 10,000 hours of repetition. Second shot. Another man fell. Now they scattered. The forest exploded with gunfire. Bullets ripped through the snow around him, tearing bark from trees, sending ice crystals flying. Simo didn't move, didn't flinch. His father had taught him, panic is death. Stillness is survival. He tracked the third soldier through the chaos, a running figure desperate for cover. The man dove behind a fallen log. Smart. But not smart enough. Simo waited. 10 seconds. 20. The forest was screaming with voices and muzzle flashes. Somewhere, an officer was shouting coordinates, organizing return fire toward empty space. They were shooting at ghosts, at shadows, at where they thought a sniper should be. They never looked down. The third soldier rose from behind the log. Just an inch, just his head, checking if the shooter was still there. Simo fired. The man crumpled. 14 kills in 3 days. Then Simo did something that violated every tactical manual ever written. He didn't retreat. He didn't relocate. He stayed exactly where he was, frozen in place, while 70 rifles tried to murder the empty forest around him, because he knew what the experts didn't. The doctrine was designed for modern warfare, for armies with supply chains and air support and armored divisions. But this wasn't modern warfare. This was winter war, and winter had its own rules. The world called it the Soviet-Finnish War. The people living it called it suicide. On November 30th, 1939, Stalin sent 450,000 soldiers across the border into Finland. He expected victory in 2 weeks. Why wouldn't he? The Soviet Union had 170 million people. Finland had 3 million. The Red Army had tanks, planes, artillery that could level cities. Finland had hunting rifles and stubbornness. The math was simple. Finland would be erased. International observers prepared obituaries for a nation. Britain was silent. France offered condolences. America watched from across the ocean, certain they were witnessing a massacre. The odds weren't just unfavorable, they were apocalyptic. This wasn't warfare, it was extermination, but Stalin made one critical miscalculation. He assumed Finland would fight like a modern army. Stand in formation, defend cities, follow the tactical doctrines written by generals in warm rooms far from the front lines. He assumed they would obey the rules. Finland couldn't afford rules, so they invented new ones. They scattered into the forests in small groups, invisible, mobile, impossible to pin down. They moved at night through terrain the Soviets considered impassable. They dressed in white. They knew every tree, every frozen lake, every place where snow was solid enough to walk and where it would swallow a tank. The Finns called these tactics Matti, surround, isolate, destroy. The Soviets called it hell. But even Finland's guerrilla warfare had limitations. You could ambush supply columns. You could sabotage roads. You could make the enemy bleed for every kilometer. But you couldn't win. Not really. Not against 500,000 soldiers backed by Stalin's industrial war machine. Finland needed something else. Something the enemy couldn't predict, couldn't defend against, couldn't understand even as it killed them. They needed fear. Not the fear of artillery or tanks. Those were expected. They needed primal fear, the kind that makes soldiers afraid to move, afraid to sleep, afraid to breathe, the kind that spreads through an army like disease and rots morale from within. They needed snipers, but not the kind described in military manuals. Not the ones with spotters and German optics and organized doctrine. Those snipers were predictable. Those snipers followed rules, and rules could be countered. Finland needed hunters, men who'd learned to kill in forests, not classrooms, men who understood that warfare wasn't science, it was patience and cold and the willingness to become part of the landscape until the moment you pulled the trigger. The Soviet generals didn't believe such men existed. They were about to meet one. But what no one knew was that the solution wasn't coming from Finland's military academies. It wasn't coming from officers or tacticians or weapons experts. It was coming from a 23-year-old farm mechanic who'd never wanted to be a soldier. His name was Simo Häyhä, and he was about to rewrite every doctrine on modern warfare to understand how Simo Häyhä became the deadliest sniper in human history. You first have to understand the frozen farm in Rautjärvi that made him. He was born December 17, 1905, into poverty that ground people into dust. Not dramatic poverty, not the kind that makes headlines, just the quiet, relentless poverty of Finland's rural south, where winter lasted 8 months and survival was a skill passed down like inheritance. His father was a farmer. His mother took in sewing work. They had 7 children and not enough food. Simo was the second youngest, invisible in the middle of too many mouths to feed. The farm was 17 hectares of stubborn earth that barely produced enough to keep the family from starvation. No electricity, no running water. When temperature dropped to -40, you either learned to work through it or you died. Complaining wasn't an option. Neither was weakness. Simo's first rifle was a hand-me-down Russian Mosin-Nagant, older than his father. The weapon was crude, heavy, designed for durability rather than accuracy. Most boys would have resented it. Simo loved it. He was 7 years old when his father took him hunting. Not for sport, for survival. The farm needed meat. Winter was coming. That meant rabbits, foxes, whatever moved through the birch forests that surrounded their land. Watch the pattern, his father said. Animals don't move random. They have trails, habits. You learn the pattern. You learn where they'll be before they know themselves. Simo watched. He learned. By age 10, he could track a rabbit through snow for 3 kilometers without losing the trail. By 12, he was out shooting his older brothers with iron sights at distances that should have been impossible. By 15, he'd stopped missing. The other children thought he was strange, too quiet, too focused. While they played, Simo practiced. Every morning before school, he'd take the Mosin into the forest and fire 50 rounds. Not at targets, at leaves, at pine cones, at anything small enough to be difficult. His mother worried. He's obsessed, she told his father. It's not healthy. His father watched Simo adjust for wind he couldn't see, compensate for distances he couldn't measure, hit targets that shouldn't have been possible with iron sights. He's not obsessed, his father said. He's found what he's good at. What Simo was good at was patience. While other hunters rushed shots and missed, Simo waited. 5 minutes, 10, 20, frozen in place until his target forgot he was there. He understood something the others didn't. Hunting wasn't about shooting. It was about stillness, about becoming part of the forest, until the moment you weren't. He learned to control his breathing, to slow his heartbeat, to exist in the space between inhale and exhale, where the body goes perfectly still and the shot goes perfectly true. The farm taught him something else, too. How to endure cold that would kill unprepared men. How to move through snow without leaving tracks. How to read wind by watching pine needles and bird flight. How to survive on nothing for days at a time. These weren't military skills. They were survival skills. But one day, they would become the foundation of something no military academy could teach. At age 17, Simo joined the Finnish Civil Guard, mandatory service for all Finnish men. They gave him a uniform and sent him to rifle training. The instructors showed him proper stance, proper grip, proper doctrine. Simo nodded politely. Then he shot circles around everyone using techniques the instructors had never seen. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" the commander asked. "Rabbits," Simo said. They didn't understand. How could they? They'd learned warfare from books and tactical manuals written by men who'd never been cold enough to die. They knew doctrine, theory, the proper way to do things. Simo knew hunger. He knew winter. He knew that survival didn't care about doctrine. He looked at the rifle in his hands, the same type that had fed his family for 17 years, and thought, "That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be the best." But the path was impossible, because everything he'd learned was about to be declared wrong. The military experts were certain, absolutely, unquestionably certain. Modern sniping required optical scopes, the German Zeiss, the Austrian Kaylies, magnification from 4-power minimum to 10-power for long range. The doctrine was written in every manual, taught at every academy, reinforced by every successful military on Earth. Without magnification, the instructors said, you're guessing. You can't see wind drift. You can't compensate for bullet drop. You're not a sniper. You're a rifleman getting lucky. They said it with the confidence of men who'd never been wrong. Never. Engage past 300 meters without optics. Always. Use a spotter for range estimation. Always. Use the highest quality glass available. That's impossible, they said when someone suggested. Otherwise, the Soviet Union believed this doctrine completely. Their snipers were equipped with 3.5x PU scopes, trained in specialized schools, given detailed range cards and ballistic tables. They were professionals, scientific, modern. The Finns received the same training, the same manuals, the same certainty that scopes were non-negotiable for serious sniping work. Simo Häyhä listened to all of it. He listened to the instructors explain why iron sights were obsolete, Why magnification was essential. Why his rabbit hunting techniques were charming, but tactically irrelevant in modern warfare. He nodded, but he didn't believe, because Simo had learned something in those frozen forests that no manual could teach. Scopes were beautiful in theory. They magnified targets. They clarified distance. They made everything seem easier, but scopes also caught sunlight. They fogged in cold weather. They forced you to raise your head higher above cover. They added reflection and glint that gave away your position. And in winter, in real winter, where temperature dropped to -40 and moisture froze instantly, scopes became unreliable glass monuments to doctrine over reality. Simo thought about rabbits, about how they'd freeze and scan for danger, how they'd spot the smallest motion, the faintest reflection, the tiny details that meant predator. Men weren't so different. He thought about the Soviet snipers he'd heard about, professionally trained, properly equipped, following every rule. And he thought about how many of them were already dead, killed by Finnish farmers with hunting rifles. The doctrine assumed warfare happened in optimal conditions: clear weather, moderate temperature, enemies who followed predictable patterns. But this was Finland. Nothing was optimal. Nothing was predictable. Winter didn't care about doctrine. Simo made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in any other army. When they issued him a standard-issue Mosin-Nagant M2830 rifle with scope mounts, he removed the scope. "What are you doing?" his commanding officer asked. "It'll fog," Simo said, "and it reflects." You can't shoot accurately without magnification. Simo looked at him with eyes that had been watching rabbits since he was 7 years old. "I can," the officer wanted to argue, wanted to enforce doctrine, but Finland was desperate. They were outnumbered 150 to 1. They needed shooters, not debates. He listened. He nodded. But watching Simo walk toward the front lines with iron sights and farm boy confidence, he thought, "This kid's going to die in a week." December 2nd, 1939. Third day of the war. Simo crouched in a hastily dug firing position near Kola, a strategic bottleneck where Finnish and Soviet forces ground against each other like continental plates. The temperature was -28. His breath wanted to fog. He held it. His orders were simple: follow doctrine, work with a spotter, use calculated ranges, engage targets at Soviet sniper positions that had been identified through intelligence reports. Professional warfare. By the book, The Spotter, a veteran named Virtanen settled in beside him. Older man, serious face. 3 wars of experience. Target area: 250 meters, bearing 045. Virtanen whispered. "Soviet sniper nest in the pine cluster. Take him when you have a clean shot." Simo sighted through his iron sights. The position was visible, barely. A small gap in the trees where a Soviet rifleman had set up overlooking the Finnish lines. Professional work. Good concealment. "I see him. Wind is left to right, approximately 5 kilometers per hour, Virtanen said. Just 1 click right." Simo made the adjustment. Exactly as doctrine demanded. He breathed in, out, halfway. Between heartbeats. A bullet snapped past his head, so close he felt the air split. Simo dropped instantly. Virtanen was already moving, scrambling backward from the position. More rounds cracked overhead, precise and lethal. Not random suppression fire, targeted shots from someone who knew exactly where they'd been. "How did he see us?" Virtanen hissed, pressed flat behind a snow berm. Simo knew how. The scope the other Finnish snipers were using, it had caught a glint of weak winter sun. Just a flash. Just enough. The Soviet sniper had spotted it and targeted the standard Finnish sniper position, because that's where doctrine said snipers would be. "We need to relocate," Virtanen said. "Standard displacement procedure, 50 meters minimum." They moved. Carefully. By the book. 10 minutes later, they'd established a new position. Better concealment. Better angle. Virtanen called the range again. Same target. Adjusted for new position. The Soviet sniper fired first. The round hit the log they were using for cover, spraying bark and ice. Simo felt the shock wave in his chest. Another round followed immediately. Then another. The Soviet knew their new position almost as fast as they'd set it up. "He's tracking doctrine," Simo said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. "He knows where we're supposed to move, where we're supposed to shoot from. He's read the same manuals we have." Virtanen's face went pale. They were fighting someone who understood. Finnish tactics, because Finnish tactics were based on the same European military doctrine the Soviets studied. Same training, same playbook, same predictable patterns. "Fall back," Virtanen ordered. "We're compromised." They retreated, fast and low. Behind them, Soviet bullets chewed apart the position they'd just abandoned. Professional, methodical, targeting every location where a sniper following proper doctrine would logically set up. That night, Simo sat in the dugout and cleaned his rifle. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of farm maintenance. Around him, other soldiers talked nervously about the Soviet snipers, how they were trained, how they were equipped, how they seemed impossible to counter. Virtanen sat down beside him. "You did good today," he said. "Staying alive counts as victory when you're outgunned." Simo looked at his rifle. No scope, no modern equipment, just iron sights and instinct. "The doctrine almost killed us," he said quietly. "The doctrine is all we have. Then the doctrine is wrong." Virtanen stared at him, wanted to argue, wanted to defend the system that had kept him alive through 3 wars, but he couldn't. Because today, the doctrine had nearly gotten them both killed, and somewhere in the forest, a Soviet sniper was waiting for them to follow the rules again. That night, Simo couldn't sleep. While other soldiers huddled around fires and tried to forget the cold, he sat alone in the darkness and thought about rabbits. He remembered being 12 years old, tracking a snow hare through the birch forest. He'd been following doctrine then, too. The hunting doctrine his father taught him. Watch the trails. Predict the pattern. Position downwind. But the rabbit hadn't appeared. For 3 hours, Simo had waited in the exact position where the tracks indicated the rabbit would pass. Perfect technique. Perfect patience. The rabbit never came. His father found him at dusk, frustrated and cold. "Why didn't it work?" Simo had asked. His father smiled. "Because the rabbit's smarter than you think. It knows predators watch the trails, so it changes pattern. Not random, deliberate. It makes new trails that look wrong, that look inefficient, that no hunter would watch. So, how do you catch it? You stop thinking like a hunter. You start thinking like the rabbit." Simo stared at his rifle in the dugout and suddenly understood. The Soviet snipers were hunting patterns, watching for predictable doctrine, waiting for Finnish soldiers to set up in positions that made tactical sense. They were reading the same book, following the same logic. But rabbits didn't follow books. Simo thought about every shot he'd missed as a child, every hunt that failed, every moment when following the rules had resulted in an empty pot and a hungry family. He thought about what actually worked, not theory, but practice. Not what should work, but what did. He grabbed his field notebook and started writing. First, eliminate all signature. No scope glint. No raised profile. No standard positioning. Become part of the landscape so completely that even trained eyes would slide past without registering danger. Second, abandon optimal firing positions. The best tactical ground was where enemy snipers expected you. Choose worse positions. Lower ground, awkward angles, locations that made no sense but provided invisibility. Third, control temperature signature. His breath couldn't fog. One white cloud against dark forest would kill him. He needed to breathe through snow or fabric to disperse the condensation. Stay lower than the fog line. Fourth, move like prey, not predator. Rabbits didn't rush. They paused, observed, moved in irregular patterns that seemed inefficient but avoided detection. No straight lines, no predictable timing. Fifth, and this was the critical piece, use iron sights as an advantage, not limitation. Scopes required higher head position. Iron sights let him stay low. Almost subterranean. Shooting from positions where enemy snipers would never think to look, because the angle seemed impossible. He thought about the windage, about how his father taught him to read air movement not through instruments, but through observation. Watch the snow crystals drift. Watch the pine needles shiver. Feel the temperature change on your cheek. Human instruments, not mechanical ones. He remembered every cold morning on the farm, every hunt where success meant survival and failure meant hunger. The lessons hadn't been about shooting. They'd been about patience, about stillness, about the ability to wait longer than your target believed possible. The doctrine said a sniper engagement lasted minutes. Take the shot. Relocate. Repeat. Simo realized, what if you didn't relocate? What if you stayed so perfectly concealed that the enemy never knew where you'd fired from? They'd search. They'd suppress empty forest. They'd waste ammunition and time and morale shooting at ghosts. And while they searched, you'd be waiting. Still, patient, invisible. It wasn't about better equipment. It wasn't about superior training. It was about changing the fundamental assumptions of the engagement. Soviet doctrine said, find enemy sniper, suppress position, target probable locations. Simo's approach said, there is no position. There is no probable location. There is only the forest, and sometimes the forest kills you. He closed the notebook. Around him, soldiers slept fitfully, dreaming of home and warmth and survival. They trusted the doctrine because trusting the doctrine meant trusting the system, believing that someone smarter and more experienced had figured out the right way to fight. Simo had learned a different truth on that frozen farm in Rautjärvi. There was no right way. There was only what worked. And what worked wasn't in any manual. He looked at his rifle, iron sights, no modifications, just wood and metal, and the intimate knowledge of exactly how this weapon behaved in his hands. He smiled. He knew something they didn't. December 6, 1939. Simo Häyhä's fourth day at the Kola front. He disappeared into the forest before dawn and didn't return until dark. No spotter, no doctrine, just him, his rifle, and a new way of hunting men. The first Soviet patrol never saw him. Simo had positioned himself in a shallow depression 3 meters in front of where doctrine said he should be. Lower ground. Worse angle. A position any tactical manual would call suicide because it offered limited escape routes and poor visibility. But it was invisible. The Soviets walked past, searching for elevated positions, scanning tree lines, checking standard sniper nests. They walked within 20 meters of Simo's position and never looked down. Why would they? No competent sniper would be there. Simo fired once. The rear soldier dropped. The others scattered, searching for the shooter in all the wrong places. Simo worked the bolt. Second shot. Third. By the time they realized the fire was coming from below their line of sight, 3 men were dead, and Simo was gone, moving through the snow in irregular patterns, leaving tracks that led nowhere. December 7th. 4 confirmed kills. December 8th, 7. His squad mates started calling him Valkoinen Kuolema, the White Death. The Russians called him something else, the Devil in the Snow. But Simo didn't think about names. He thought about rabbits, about patience, about becoming part of the landscape until the moment you weren't. He developed routines that seemed bizarre to other soldiers. Before positioning, he'd pack snow in front of his rifle to prevent muzzle blast from disturbing the surface and creating a telltale puff. He'd fill his mouth with snow to cool his breath and eliminate fog. He'd lie so still that birds would land on his back. Other snipers worked in 2-hour shifts. Simo would stay in position for 20 hours. Motionless. Frozen. Waiting. How do you stand it? A fellow soldier asked. The cold? The stillness? I grew up in it, Simo said. This is just farming with different stakes. December 10th. The Russians sent counter-snipers, professional teams, Soviet Union's best, men trained in specialized schools, equipped with scoped, Mosin-Nagants and German optics captured from earlier conflicts. They came hunting for the White Death, with the confidence of experts facing an amateur. Simo killed them one by one. He studied their patterns, watched them set up in textbook positions, waited for them to scan the horizons and tree lines and elevated ground. Then he shot them from below, from angles they'd never practiced defending, using techniques no academy taught. The Russian commanders couldn't understand it. How was a Finnish farm boy outgunning their elite snipers? They had better equipment, better training, superior numbers. But they were fighting doctrine with doctrine. Simo was fighting with winter. December 15th, 11 kills in a single day. He'd found a position near a Soviet supply route. Bad tactical ground, too exposed, too flat, offering almost no cover, which meant no Soviet sniper would ever look there. Simo stayed in that position for 18 hours. Soviet patrols passed. Supply trucks rolled by. The Russians were so certain the area was clear that they'd stopped checking it. By dusk, 11 Soviet soldiers were dead, and the entire supply route had been abandoned. The Russians declared the area cursed. They refused to patrol it. Morale crumbled. One man had shut down an entire logistics corridor. December 22nd. The Russians tried artillery. If they couldn't find the White Death, they'd level the entire forest. They poured shells into the tree line for 3 hours, turning forest into moonscape. Simo had already moved. He'd watched them position the artillery, read their firing pattern, calculated the impact zone, and relocated before the first shell landed. He was 300 meters away, watching Soviet soldiers fire at his old position when he started shooting. 5 more kills. January 3rd, 1940. 47 confirmed kills in 34 days. Soviet commanders held emergency meetings. How do you fight an enemy who doesn't follow tactical logic? How do you counter a sniper who operates outside every known doctrine? They tried everything. Counter-sniper teams, artillery barrages, infantry sweeps. They even attempted psychological warfare, spreading rumors that the White Death was multiple soldiers, a propaganda myth to boost Finnish morale. It didn't matter, because while they were organizing responses based on military science and tactical theory, Simo was simply doing what he'd always done: hunting. The rest of the world started paying attention. Military observers from Sweden and Germany filed reports analyzing the phenomenon. Newspapers across Europe ran stories about the mysterious Finnish sniper killing Soviets by the dozens. The Finns formed small sniper squads, trying to replicate Simo's success. They called themselves Motin-Nagant, forest ghosts. The Soviets called them the White Death's children. But no one could match Simo. Because they were trying to learn technique. They were trying to copy tactics. What they couldn't copy was the farm, the cold. The 17 years of rabbit hunting that had taught him patience wasn't a skill. It was survival. January the 16th. Simo Häyhä's confirmed kill count reached 138, and he was just getting started. But every legend comes with a cost. The same cold that made Simo invisible was destroying him from inside. His joints ached constantly. His fingers had lost feeling weeks ago. Frostbite crept across his feet, turning toes black with necrosis. Other soldiers rotated back to warm bunkers every few days. Simo stayed in the forest. Days blurred into weeks. The line between soldier and landscape disappeared. He'd become exactly what he'd intended, a permanent part of the winter. It was killing him. In early February, his squad mates noticed the changes. Simo moved slower. His famous stillness wasn't discipline anymore. It was exhaustion. His eyes, once sharp and focused, had gone distant. Hollow. "You need rest," his commander said. "Medical leave. Just 3 days." "The Russians don't rest," Simo replied. "You're no good to us dead." Simo looked at him with the same expression he'd given his father 20 years ago when told to stop practicing. "I'm not dead yet." But the cost wasn't just physical. Every night in the dugout, Simo cleaned his rifle and tried not to think about the men he'd killed. Young faces, scared faces, soldiers who'd been drafted same as him, sent to die in a forest for reasons none of them fully understood. The doctrine had taught him to see enemies, numbers, tactical objectives. The farm had taught him something else. Everything you kill leaves a mark. He thought about rabbits again, about how his father would always say a prayer after a successful hunt. Thank the animal. Respect what it gave you. Never forget the cost of survival. Simo hadn't said a prayer in weeks. There were too many to pray for. February 17, 1940. His kill count reached 219 confirmed, over 500 probable. The Finnish government wanted to give him medals, promote him, make him a symbol. Simo just wanted to go home. The snow that had been his greatest weapon now felt like a prison. The forest that had protected him had become a tomb. Every morning he woke up colder than the day before, and every morning it took longer to remember why he was fighting. His hands shook when he loaded his rifle. Not fear, damage. The cold had worked into his bones, creating tremors that made fine motor control difficult. His famous accuracy was degrading. Soon, he knew, he'd miss a shot. And when a sniper misses, they die. The same sky he'd grown up under, bright and clear and infinite, now seemed darker somehow. The same tools he'd used to feed his family were now counting bodies. The same winter that had raised him was preparing to bury him. Victory had a price, and Simo Häyhä was paying it in pieces of himself he'd never get back. But the war didn't care about cost. The war needed him, so he picked up his rifle one more time and walked back into the forest. March 6, 1940. 11:23 a.m. Temperature -39 degrees Celsius. Simo Häyhä. Häyhä lay in his final position near Ulisma, 27 kilometers from where he had started this war 97 days earlier. His body was failing. Frostbite had claimed 3 toes. His hands were little more than aching ghosts, attached to a will that refused to surrender. Every breath cut like broken glass drawn into his lungs. His world was a mixture of pain, silence, and the endless white of Finland's winter. The Soviets were making their last push. They had brought everything: artillery, tanks, elite infantry units trained specifically to hunt men like him. This was not another raid. It was annihilation. the kind that comes with an order written in cold bureaucracy. Take this sector at any cost. Finland's high command knew they could not hold. Their soldiers were exhausted, half-starved, frostbitten, and nearly out of ammunition. But they could still buy time. Time for civilians to flee, for diplomats to finish peace negotiations, for the country to survive another day. That time would be paid for in blood. Simo's orders were simple. Slow them down. He lay in a shell crater, the worst possible sniper's nest. No elevation, no clean sight lines, surrounded by broken earth and stumps that would funnel enemy fire toward him the moment he revealed himself. It was a suicide position, and that was precisely why he chose it. The Soviets had learned to check the high ground and the obvious cover. No one would expect a man to be waiting in the middle of the killing field itself. Simo had found an impossible position inside the impossible positions. At 11:30 a.m., the Soviet advance began. 200 men moved through the forest in disciplined waves. They were cautious now. Months of guerrilla ambushes had taught them to respect the unseen. They moved in small groups, covering one another, scanning every shadow. The forest shivered with their movement, the rhythmic crunch of boots and the faint jingle of equipment breaking the cold silence. Simo watched, counted heartbeats, remembered his father's words. You don't shoot until you're certain. Certainty comes through patience. The first wave passed within 50 meters. He did not fire. Revealing himself too early would be suicide. He waited for the officers, the men who gave orders, the minds behind the machine. Then he saw them, the squad leaders moving slightly ahead, eyes sharper, gestures deliberate, targets that mattered. He exhaled once, slowly, then fired. The first squad leader dropped where he stood. The second fell before the first body hit the ground. The third managed half a shout before silence claimed him. 3 shots. 4 seconds. 3 deaths. The advance faltered instantly. Soviet discipline collapsed into chaos. Shouts, confusion, the instinctive dive for cover. They searched the tree line, the high ridges, everywhere except down. Simo worked the bolt again and again, calm and precise. He found the radio operator next, his antenna glinting faintly in the low light. 1 shot. The radio sparked and died. The Soviet chain of command died with it. Then came the storm. Hundreds of rounds raked the forest. Mortars exploded among the trees, shaking snow loose like white fire. But the Soviets were shooting at phantoms. Simo was already flat against the frozen earth, invisible, waiting. When the smoke cleared and they began to advance again, he struck from the flank. 4 more kills. Panic rippled through their ranks. You can order men to charge a fortress. You cannot order them to walk into invisible death. But death was hunting him too. A Soviet sniper had been watching the chaos with a professional's eye. While others panicked, he had traced the angles of Simo's shots, found the one impossible geometry that fit. The first bullet struck 3 inches from Simo's head, spraying frozen dirt into his face. He didn't flinch. Didn't move, he calculated. The enemy had to be in a tree hollow, 70 meters north-northwest. He couldn't see him, but he could know. 2 snipers, unseen, each aware that the next shot would decide which lived. Simo aimed where the scope must be, not where the man was. He fired. Metal rang. Glass shattered. The Soviet's shot went wide, whistling harmlessly past. Before the man could recover, Simo fired again. This time, the outline in the hollow went limp. 16 seconds. 7 kills. The Soviet line froze. They tried again at noon, again at 1, again at 3. Each time, Simo broke them. By dusk, hundreds of men refused to advance. No officer could compel them. At 4:47 p.m., an explosive round detonated 5 meters from his crater. The blast hurled Simo into the wall of ice and soil. His vision went white. His body screamed. Something was broken. Several somethings. His rifle lay beyond reach. He crawled toward it, dragging himself with numb arms. His fingers would not close around the stock, so he used his forearms, braced the weapon, and kept firing. 3 more Soviets fell. Then silence again. The Soviets did not advance. They could not. Their bodies might obey orders, but their souls refused. The fear of one unseen man outweighed the command of generals. At 6:15 p.m., a Soviet officer stood up to rally them, shouting about the motherland and courage. Simo's bullet ended the speech mid-sentence. The forest went still. The day was over. When Finnish soldiers reached him at nightfall, they found a man half-frozen, bloodied, bones shattered, but alive. 25 confirmed kills that day alone, 505 across the entire Winter War. The deadliest sniper in human history. And he had done it with nothing more than iron sights, patience, and the quiet defiance of a man who refused to believe in the impossible. Simo Häyhä survived the Winter War. Barely. The Soviet Union eventually took the territory they wanted, but at catastrophic cost. They'd sent 500,000 soldiers to conquer 3 million Finns. They'd lost over 150,000 men. Finland lost $26,000. Finame, math that should have guaranteed Soviet victory, had been rewritten by farmers and mechanics and hunters who refused to fight by the rules. And in the center of that impossible resistance was a 23-year-old who'd learned to shoot by tracking rabbits. Simo returned to Rautjärvi in 1940. The farm was still there, 17 hectares of stubborn earth that barely produced enough to keep a family alive. He hung up his rifle, took up farming again, and never spoke about the war unless directly asked. When reporters tried to interview him, he'd give one-sentence answers and return to his fields. When military historians wanted to study his techniques, he'd shrug and say, "I did what needed doing." But his impact echoed far beyond one winter war. Military academies around the world studied his methods. They tried to systematize what he'd done, turn instinct into doctrine. They failed, because what Simo had done couldn't be taught in classrooms. It could only be learned through cold and hunger and 17 years of patience. The Soviet Union changed their entire sniper training program because of him. So did Finland. So did Germany and Britain, and eventually the United States. They all tried to produce snipers like the White Death. None succeeded, because they were trying to manufacture genius through training. Simo's genius came from necessity, from growing up in conditions that would kill the unprepared, from learning that survival didn't care about optimal tactics or proper doctrine. Winter had its own rules, and Simo had learned them before he learned to read. In 2002, at age 96, Simo Häyhä was asked what he thought about being called the greatest sniper in history. He looked at the interviewer with eyes that had watched 500 men die and said, "I did what I had to do, and I did it with what I had." No scope, no spotter, no modern equipment, just a farm mechanic's understanding that sometimes the experts are wrong, that sometimes the doctrine fails, that sometimes the only way to win is to stop fighting like you're supposed to and start fighting like you must. He died in 2002, outliving the war by 62 years. His rifle is displayed in a Finnish military museum. Thousands of visitors see it every year. A plain Mosin-Nagant with iron sights, unremarkable in every way, except for what it did in the right hands. Wars aren't won by experts following doctrine in climate-controlled rooms. Wars aren't won by the best equipment or the most advanced technology. Wars are won by farmers who understand winter, by mechanics who see the flaw in the system, by ordinary people forced into impossible situations who refuse to accept that impossible means defeated. Simo Häyhä proved that genius isn't something you're born with. It's something you survive into. And sometimes, the difference between victory and death is nothing more than patience, cold, and the willingness to ignore everyone who says it can't be done. If you found Simo Häyhä's story as powerful as we did, help keep it alive. This isn't just history. It's a reminder that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they're pushed to the edge and refuse to break. That doctrine isn't destiny. That sometimes the farm mechanic sees what the general misses, from Rautjärvi to Kola, from frozen forests to modern battlefields. These stories matter. They remind us that expertise isn't always right, that traditional wisdom can be questioned, that the person everyone underestimates might be the one who changes everything. We tell these stories because they deserve to exist beyond textbooks and military archives. Because Simo Häyhä wasn't trying to become a legend, he was trying to survive. And in surviving, he rewrote the rules. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment about what struck you most. Subscribe to see more forgotten stories of ordinary people who refuse to accept impossible. Because the next time someone tells you something can't be done, remember the farm mechanic who ignored every expert and became the deadliest sniper in human history with iron sights and patience. The way he'd always hunted rabbits.